For more insight on the latest developments in the war, let's speak with Dr. Bernd Kaussler. He's a professor of political science at James Madison University, and he joins us this morning from Harrisonburg, Virginia. Professor, today marks 1 month since the war erupted, and Israel looks like it's ramping up its offensive in Gaza in its quest to defend itself against Hamas.
Yeah, I think it looks like Israel has, or the Israeli government, I should say, has two choices right now. It can continue indefinitely with shelling and incursions, using the tanks and everything at its disposal, which of course is a rather sophisticated military machine. Or it can say the revenge we've done is enough. We've liquidated, most of the infrastructure in Gaza, and we can declare victory. That, of course, would lead Hamas to say that we won. We brought Israel to its knees. We, still alive, and we emerge victoriously out of this conflict. So I think that second option, that Israel will stop the shelling and stop incursions, is very unlikely. What is more likely is that it will continue with what you're seeing, which, of course, many of which amount to human rights, war crimes, violations of international humanitarian law. Looking at the amount of civilians which have lost their lives. So I feel the Israeli government right now is still tempted to continue regardless of international outcry, regardless of what the United Nations agencies are saying. We have over almost 4,000 children who died in this conflict. Almost 400 children are being killed or wounded every day. It's extraordinary. But I don't see that the Israelis will cease that campaign anytime soon.
On that point, Professor, of international outcry, Jordan has airdropped urgent medical supplies to a field hospital in Gaza after coordinating with Israel. What clues does this offer around Israel's humanitarian strategy as the war drags on?
I don't think there's any humanitarian strategy whatsoever. At least, basically, all of these, if it gives a pause in fighting, it leaves it up to the Egyptians and the Jordanians to provide any humanitarian aid. Of course, both countries, both the Egyptian government and the Jordanians, are very, very uneasy about that this conflict will spill over into both, into their countries. So it could be hugely destabilizing for them. So they have, of course, a primary humanitarian objective to help Palestinians, but they're also very concerned about what it could mean for their own security. But let's look today. Today, 93 trucks came into the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza. We're talking 93 trucks with 2 million displaced people in Gaza. This is nothing. This, what we're seeing an extraordinary amount of suffering in Gaza. And they're not getting the help they needed, Palestinian civilians, by any means. It really is up to the United States to demand a ceasefire, and that, by all accounts, is not happening. You see, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is, going to, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, of course, Israel, and he's trying to avoid a further destabilization regionally. But the Israelis aren't doing it. They're not, they're not agreeing to a ceasefire. But it really only the United States government has the power to pressure the Israelis. And that happened before. Let's not have, memory of only 1 month. 1982, President Reagan forced Prime Minister Begin to stop the shelling of Beirut, of Lebanon, the Lebanese capital. And it was only after Reagan pushed the Israeli Prime Minister that they stopped with the campaign. 2006, President Bush forced the Israelis to withdraw from Gaza. So again, there's a lot of power American presidents have because of that, special relationship the US has with Israel. But so far, it's not happening.
You're putting the onus on the US there. Blinken wrapped up his Middle East tour without securing the humanitarian pause that he sought. The US is now talking about tactical pauses. What does that mean to you? And why don't they seem to be willing to convince Israel to, stop for more humanitarian reasons?
Yeah. I think these are sort of semantics. A ceasefire is sort of a formal agreement between two warring parties that they will stop hostilities. Usually that means that the International Committee for the Red Cross gets access as the guardians of international humanitarian law, and can provide important humanitarian aid to belligerents and civilians. So that's sort of a formal ceasefire. A tactical pause saying that we're not shaking hands with anyone, but we might stop, firing for several hours, that some trucks can drive into Gaza from Egypt, or that the Jordanians can drop some aid packages. So again, we're looking semantics, because ceasefire, really somebody has to shake hands. Usually that's, of course, done in that case between Israel and Palestine by the Americans. But the Americans are awfully worried about that this is will create a major regional spillover. And the Iranians, of course, the Iranian government saying that this is, we are redrawing the geopolitical map of the Middle East. That's the worst nightmare for the Americans. And of course, terrible nightmare. Like, the Israelis are going through a nightmare already because of the Hamas atrocities. But redrawing the map, which would favor the Iranians. And of course, the Iranians are talking about the axis of resistance. So they have Hamas fighting in the south against Israel. Then they have Hezbollah in the north. As you saw in your report, shelling Haifa, the port city in northern Israel. So that's sort of the worst case scenario, that this will spill over, and it really it could help the Iranians to redraw the geopolitical map of the Middle East.
Professor, during his return wartime visit, Antony Blinken said the Palestinian Authority should play a central role in the future of the Strip. How likely is that? How much legitimacy do they still have?
Yeah, I mean, that's, Hamas has been in charge of the Gaza Strip, for over 20 years now. A lot of awful things could happen. The Israelis could continue with the campaign and destroy Hamas, and something far worse than Hamas could emerge out of the ashes of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority, that's the internationally recognized legitimate representation of Palestinians, which at some point, should become, the government of a sovereign Palestinian country. For them to govern Gaza, might be amount to a civil war between the PA and other factions and Hamas. The Israelis could maybe install, like-minded Palestinian leaders to govern Hamas govern Gaza if Hamas were to be destroyed. These are all very unlikely scenarios. What I think is more likely, or if you're reading the tea leaves of what's happening, is that Israel is trying to disconnect parts of Gaza into two parts. Gaza City, so separating perhaps the nucleus of Hamas from the rest of the population. But really, what I'm seeing right now, Gaza Strip becomes ungovernable by anyone. Israelis, never mind by Palestinians. So I think we have a lot of uncertainty ahead, and a lot of human suffering for Palestinians in particular, and of course for Israelis. I mean, there's all the families who are asking the Israeli government for the hostages to be released. Those hostages are not being released if you continue to shell, Gaza. And of course, the Israeli government says we're not, negotiating from a position of weakness. If they return the hostages, then maybe we'll have a ceasefire. So again, there's pressure within the Israeli society, of course, in particular of those who've lost loved ones and who, are still waiting for their loved ones to return out of Gaza.
Still so many questions about the future of Gaza's governance and rebuilding. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Bernd Kaussler from the James Madison University.